Ah, there he is. Okay. Right, we just need to test the vocals. So, Mr. Parkinson, can you hear us? Or not?
Good morning, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you fine.
Excellent. Right, okay. Let's put... Right, you're on our main screen. At the moment you can see me, which isn't great, so I'm going to just turn around the camera so you get a chance to see the students, and then they're going to ask you a series of questions. Okay? Right.
Okay.
Let's see how we can get this. Right, I'm just going to be cameraman face up. They're all waving. There they are.
Good morning.
Okay, there's Year 7 students, Mr. Parkinson. So Mr. Podbury is going to lead the Q&A session, so I'll just act as cameraman for a little while and maybe pitch in a bit later. But it's fantastic for you to join us today. Let's give Mr. Parkinson a round of applause before we even start. Okay, Mr. Podbury, over to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so good morning, Mr. Parkinson. I hope you're okay. Thank you very much.
Fine, Mr. Podbury.
Thank you very much for linking up with us. And as you know, we've been doing some work on the Iceman since the beginning of Year 7. And the students have been studying the book that you've put together. And I know you've seen some of the tweets that we've sent out with some of the student work. And Mr. Parkinson's obviously on Twitter as well. And he's been watching with great interest in what we've been up to. And some of the students have written down some questions that they've still got, which they would quite like to ask you, if at all possible. And then we kind of throw it open to a debate afterwards about writing books, for example. So I don't know if anyone would like to start off with a question. That's Mary at the front.
Do you think that Oxy was found in a gully by coincidence?
So, was he there naturally, or do you think he was left there, or was he thrown in there?
That is a very interesting question, actually. Obviously, one of the only bits of the book that I had to sort of make up was that particular section, the section about the circumstances under which he was found and how he actually died. Now, obviously a gully could well fill with snow and therefore be more likely to have ice covering a body over time. But whether he fell in or whether he was thrown in is an interesting question. I suppose you could start by saying, well, why would somebody want to hide his body? It was a long way from anywhere. It was very unlikely that he was to be discovered. It's not like perhaps today where you might be looking to bury a corpse like that. I mean, he was up in the mountains. It was an interesting location where he was found. So one aspect of it is he may well have fallen into the gully, but my feeling is that perhaps he was sheltering from the weather. That's the angle that I took in the book, that he was perhaps trying to hide from somebody or shelter from the weather, and then perhaps succumb to his injuries. So that's just my take on that. Obviously, when you're writing a story, you have to consider several options, and I thought that was the one that perhaps made most sense. But yeah, it's an interesting question because obviously nobody was there at the time, and that's the bit about the work that you've been doing, isn't it? That you've been trying to work out a mystery, and that is one of those parts of the story that remains a mystery, really. The science can tell us a lot of fact, but that particular part of the book is a bit of fiction rather than fact. So thank you for your question. That's great.
Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. We've got another question now from Maddie.
What made you want to write about Oxy?
Okay. Well, before I wrote the book, I had written other books, but those books were really about facts. They were for teachers, really, rather than children. And the people who published my book got in touch with me and asked me, could I think of some stories which might be of interest to people of your age? So I gave them a long list of stories. Sometimes they were based on things that had happened in the past. Sometimes they were about adventures. And they suggested that the Ötzi story was perhaps one of the most interesting ones. So I then went back to my original thinking and started to plan out the book. So part of that came from when I was at school. When I was your age at school, and we had history lessons, we had, I suppose, a new way of teaching history, which was to try and solve mysteries. And one of the mysteries we were given was about a person who was found, and you had to look at what was in their pockets, and you had to try and work out the story of and piece together their sort of last few hours. So alongside that, we looked at a discovery called the Tolland Man, and the Tolland Man is actually in the Iceman book. I think some of you have got the book with you, haven't you? And Tolland Man is on page 40 in the book, and that was a body that was found in Denmark. And so this idea of people being found in the landscape is one that sort of appealed to me. And the other thing about Ötzi was just how old he was. So you had this sort of mystery about how he'd survived and how he'd actually lived his life. And so that's why I really chose the book. It's partly because somebody asked me to write the book, but also because it sounded like an interesting story to explore for me, myself, to find out more. Thank you for your question. Thank you.
Matt? This one?
Okay.
Oh, we just lost him there.
Sorry.
He's turned his light off.
The lights have gone off.
I don't know if you can still hear us, Mr. Parkinson. You've disappeared briefly, so hopefully you'll be back with us in a second.
Has to be a power cut in Norfolk.
It's usually they've lost internet connection for a second. Who's going to be next? Come on, Dean.
Okay. We listen as Mr. Parkinson was talking through things. If you think of anything, it would be a good question to ask, but you need to listen, because obviously you don't have to ask him something that he's already just given you the answer for. So we just require to listen quite carefully. Okay? We've got, I'll come round and speak to you individually as he's answering the questions, just to tell you who's going to be going next. We're not going to have a chance to get through all of these questions. Okay, and some of them he's actually already answered. I'm just going through looking at them now. Okay? Well,
I have a question.
I did receive one from you, but I didn't understand it, which is why I wasn't included.
What I'm going to do is stop broadcast and then start it again and invite him again, see if we can do it that way.
Okay. So, quick break. Oh my God, that's going to scare people. Maybe you just got too scared by you.
Okay, I'm just going to stop it and try connecting